There are pioneers. I don't use this word often, but in women's football, you see not just human beings, you see actual pioneers who've changed the landscape of the game. Tatiana, Ebru, Kelly Simmons, Rachel Pavlou, Hope Powell, they have really changed the game, and they need to be credited big style. And I think that's where I get my hunger of how I can get better and hopefully support the growth to my best ability.
You know, Ed, I can feel your passion. I can feel that you are knowledgeable about what you are talking about. You have gained quite a few years of experience, and indeed you are recognized as a male ally in women's football. What does the industry need, in your view, to turn allyship from an exception into the standard?
Welcome to Sustainable Futures with Daniela Bas, where innovation meets impact. Join me every first and the third Saturday at 10 a.m. Central European Time for engaging conversations with visionaries reshaping industries like fashion, tech, tourism, sports, and more through social fairness and sustainability. As a global leader and change maker, I share fresh insights and actionable ideas to inspire meaningful change and drive results. Tune in, subscribe, and help shape a brighter, sustainable future.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, in whichever part of the world you are. Today we talk about sport, fairness, and career options for youth and also women with Ed Bowers, a podcaster, event manager, and more, an expert on youth and also their sport career. Hello, Ed.
Hey, Daniela, lovely to be here and such a joy to be on your podcast show. Nice to be on the other side of the mic for a change.
For a change, right? I was your guest last year, so thank you so much. I have a jolly question for you, Ed. If you had to create a sports team that represents not just athletic skills, but fairness, inclusion, and sustainability, who would you recruit and why?
Who would I recruit?
Yes.
So I have to create a team, right? And who would I bring on board? I think I'd call my team Unity FC. That would be the name of the team. And I think for a recruitment standpoint, I would start, and I've interviewed quite a lot of psychologists, but I think I would start with a performance psychologist to recruit first, because I think if our psychology is right at the leadership, the team itself on the pitch, which is the product, and then the executive team, it's taught me that psychology has an amazing influence to our performance. And that's who I'd recruit first. And then around that, build a culture. Around that, build a business plan. But I think I've learned through the people I've interviewed and also me developing myself, a lot of it comes down to our mindset and how we approach ourselves in how we come across. Like myself on this podcast, I came prepared. So it means I put my mindset in the right state before joining you. But beforehand, I could have been on a different project or call that could have adjusted that state due to stress. So that's related to your question. That'd be the first person I'd hire.
So now you had a slight idea of who Ed Bowers is. Please help me to pronounce your family name properly.
Bowers.
Bowers.
Yeah.
Okay. He is the host of the Sports Career Podcast. Now it is in its 10th session, I believe. And it is a dedicated advocate for youth empowerment, this podcast, and fairness in sports as well. Ed is an ally in women's football. He believes very much also in the role of men and women together, but you will share more about this concept of yours with us, Ed. And also you have supported 4 Athens Women's Football Summits. And recently, Ed has founded, I believe, Women's Football in Industry Limited to drive growth in this sector.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a deep expertise in talent management, international events, and mentoring. And Ed continues to inspire meaningful change in sports and in business. So, Ed, with a decade of the Sports Career Podcast under your belt, What do you believe has been the most transformative moment for young professionals breaking into the sports industry?
Firstly, Daniela, thank you for that introduction. I've never heard that before because I'm sort of one that just likes to do my work or my craft and not worry about titles or myself in a way in regards to what you've just said. Like listening to myself, that introduction, I was like, oh, God, my goodness, I've done quite a fair bit in 10 years. But with regards to the podcast, let's go back in time
Yes, please.
because in regards to the podcast itself, because when somebody listens to that introduction, there's a journey behind it, and there's change as well. And the reason I share this with me being passionate about sports career education at a very young age, I think it's important that I'm on a journey. I don't have all the answers, but I've certainly know the patterns of behavior, certainly learning through the podcast journey. So to go back in time, I'm, was really big into tennis, really big into sports. Won't go in too much detail because, I'm mindful of your listeners and I want to get to the point of the podcast,
Well,
but
the
I was
people like
dyslexic. No,
stories.
no, they do. But I was at a very young age, Daniela, sport was my beacon of expressing who I was, learning different skills. I was dyslexic. Um, Actually had to go to like a certain educational school called Linda Mubel. So it's like going to school plus doing this other school to really help with my English. And I bring this up because in the classroom, it was a real struggle, like extreme struggle. So sport was only my environment where I can express different skills, be part of different sports to showcase that I'm not just Ed who struggles in the classroom. And I think there's many out there where being dyslexic actually builds resilience because it wasn't that I was not smart. It was just at the time of my development, I couldn't comprehend. It was comprehension where I struggled. And I bring this up because sport was a helping hand. But be very brief, but it's important. At the age of 12, I had a spinal operation and it was my defining moment. So I've got metal in the bottom of my spine. It was the same. My operation was on 7/7, which was the London bombings. I was literally down that corner where it happened. So my surgery still went, but it meant down in that for 2 years I couldn't play sport.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, you've just taken the one thing that gave me something with purpose, which meant I had to just really look in the mirror a little bit and go, let's figure out this education because education is a tool for life. It's not just a degree, it's not just a certificate of a grade, it's the way we learn and be more mindful of the bigger world. So, and there's a wonderful ending to this because, I have to shout out some schools because they really helped me. Like Sunningdale Prep, I went for a school of 30 in a class to then 12, 75 in the whole school. Was a big struggle because I had to learn Latin, Daniela, and learning Latin is fun with the history of understanding Troy and the ancient Greeks, but learning Latin, I was like, oh my goodness. But it taught me about the roots of words. Where did the English word root origin come from? And that where it created curiosity, even if it was a big struggle. Then I went to Shipplake College, which was a fresh slate. And I bring up this up, and it does answer a question with the podcast because I've learned in life having a fresh slate where you're equal with all your other peers, it means you can grow collectively without a stigma, without an identity that I wasn't smart. So when I was at Sunningdale, I was only there for 2 years. So going to Shipplake was a fresh start. And this was the key. What I loved about Shipplake College was they had two grading systems, a academic grade system, which was A to F, and an effort system, which one was high and 5 was very poor. It's like to get an A5 doesn't make sense. Let's put it that way, because you can't get an A if you put in no effort. So the one thing I was proud of, and it's meaningful to me, is because this is private education, which is probably the greatest present I don't take for granted is going private school, is my mum was on my eye level and she said, if you want to stay here, you better work hard because this is a huge investment. Yeah. And I'm being honest with you, and I don't like too much praise, but the proudest moment of my time at the school was I got every effort grade award from year 9 to year 13. Everyone, and they could check the school records, but it's true. And I bring this up is because it changes my philosophy of effort versus talent. You hear it all the time in elite sport. You can have the greatest talent, but if you don't nurture the effort, there are exceptions where effort can overcome talent. And I'll give you one perfect example. I went from being an F grade student to leaving and graduating to go to Durham University within that 5-year period. So it taught me that if you put in the hard work, I was working on weekends on my own schoolwork. I managed, and I got told I wouldn't get to university because I'm dyslexic. So getting to uni, and I have to, it's probably my proudest moments, because university is an interesting topic now in the way we learn. But for me, of way of thanking my parents, going to Durham till this day is my proudest moment. Like graduating from that cathedral. But the challenge academic wise, when I got to Durham, I was like, oh my goodness, Daniel, I'm like, the stretch of going from school to Durham. But it's another tip I will give is you need to be stretched in your ability over a period of time. It can't happen overnight, but I'm just trying to share these are those little lessons that helped me building up to the podcast. So I'll get to the podcast now, but I think by people knowing about Ed Bowers, hopefully can provide a bit of understanding of who I am with your lovely introduction, but also before even I thought about a podcast. So I graduated from Durham, so proud, got the 2-1, which I'm even more proud of because that was an achievement in itself. And when I was in the workforce in the football industry or sports industry, there wasn't much of a resource. I was commuting into London, a company called Benchmark International or Sports Industry Group. They're a great company. And I also worked at Sky Sports as well and Soccer X. So I got this experience, but this is all through networking, which you and I both know is so important. And, I didn't get any training of it. I think it's just the way you communicate with others. And I'll be honest, Daniel, being an only child, I'm a better communicator speaking to older people than my own generation. I'll be so honest, because being an only child and what I went through in my educational world, it meant I looked up to people at age as role models. And so I always like learning from different perspectives. So that's where the curiosity definitely came. But I was learning that there wasn't much information about working in the sports industry. I'm put things in context. We're talking 2014, 2015. So when I was commuting into work, I'm going, I can't learn from these amazing people in the industry. It's sort of like a hidden brick wall. It's only behind the brick wall, who's working in sport. So story short, I did this amazing internship. I walked back to my father's flat from Byfleet and Newhall Station. I was looking at the stars going, I can do this result. I was looking at stars going, I've got my degree. I've got some net connections. And I think I can create something where I can help myself, but then educate many at the same time. So I moved up the country. It's a lot cheaper to run a company up north than it is in London. And I literally took me about 4 months to do as much reading as I can on business. And then I'm a big believer of listen to your parents at times. And my mom said, just find some inspiration. And I came across iTunes and its podcast section. Well, Daniela, 8 hours later, I listened to 8 hours worth of podcasts. My first one was John Lee Dumas and Lewis Howes, School of Greatness, his first book coming out on Entrepreneurs on Fire. And I went, that's it, light bulb moment. And I said to myself, I'm going to be a podcaster from now to a year from now. So basically I said to myself, like a written contract, from a year's time, I'm going to brand myself as a podcaster. It's the most, I'm not all about labels. I heard a great quote recently, labels are for jars, like jam jars. But the one label I'm proud of is being a podcaster, because that moment I had to figure out how to run the show. And it was a lot harder back then. Just put things in perspective. I had to use Skype, had to use another tool to get the audio, split it. Then I had to use another tool to transcribe it. And it was a lot harder to get things running. And story short, I interviewed Martin Roderick, my academic advisor at Durham. I had my headmaster as well from Shiplake as well. And then I had John Amici, who's OBE, who I think you would love. He was the first NBA player to play for Great Britain, for the UK, but also he's a performance psychologist. Talk about psychology again. And, what I loved about these 3 different perspectives, I learned so much from them of their career journey. But I gave it to a mentor called Chris Wright, a family friend. He listened to the John Amici podcast, and he goes, Ed, this is fantastic. But I went, oh dear, here's that but word. You got to do 1 a week. 1 a week? I said, it took me like 4 weeks. It took me 4 weeks to get these 3. So I was scratching my head. How do I get 10? How do I get like 100? How do I get 200? And I think people listening to a podcast that I've been running for 10 years, it came down to the purpose of why I started the show. And it's this, Daniela. Number 1, the show's purpose was to educate people about the sports industry. Number 2, educate people about different career paths. Number 3, it was about understanding and learning from current practitioners in that role. So, it was credible, it was relatable. And then the 4th thing, which I'm most proud of, which we can touch on, is it's a resource that changes the narrative of careers from a diversity, inclusion, and equal access. And I can touch on that a bit later. I didn't realize that during the show, but I learned that the way we are online, social media in particular, is a reflection of society where things need to develop, or things are developing for the greater good. I try not to think negatively. I always like to think of the positive outlook. So the podcast started then, but a lot of the time, Daniela, and I love always our conversations we had at Sega in Portugal. The first thing when people come on my show at the beginning is like, Ed, how do you make money out of this? And I'm going, whoa. Focus on the mission. And eventually, whatever projects I do, any collaborations I do is monetizing. And I always say that now openly, like the podcast has created opportunities off the mic, because I want the education experience to be the best experience for the listener to grow with their development. And that is how it's led to Athens. That's how it's led to my introduction to women's football. That's how it's led to speaking to you at other conferences. But I think sometimes I'm all about monetization, but when we do something like, put this perspective, the first 60 special guests, Daniela, I had to explain what a podcast was. Okay, so we're dealing with habits and behavior, which I had to face as a podcaster, which if you start a podcast now, everybody knows what a podcast is. So
right.
I'm just putting in perspective that I look back of the journey, which I'm proud, like season 10, I'm no joke. I feel like the fresh Ed Bowers in season 1, but I promise you, Daniel, and you feel free to dig deep on this, but I would say from the ages of, so I started the show when I was 21. I would say from the age of 24 to 28, 29 were the hardest, the resilience of keeping it consistent, because I'll finish on this point. At 2017, I drew a line. Like I said already, the power of drawing a line. I wasn't consistent. I was doing 1 every 2 weeks. I went, nope, this year you've got to do 1 a week from January to December, no buts. And I did that for 7 years straight. Last year, I missed 5 weeks because of other projects, and it wasn't worth the stress. But that discipline of those 7 years, it's made me who I am. So I saw your reaction, but I just want to put in perspective is this podcast has been a journey, and it's an ongoing one.
Well, also I have to thank you, because months ago you gave me very important tips on how to start my own podcast. So thank you. And how many people have you interviewed in, these last 10 years?
So that's a really good question, because I've actually 3 episodes.
300, 400?
No, I'll give you. I'm 3 episodes from 400 episodes, but I've interviewed far more than 400. What people don't realize, I did an online summit with a good friend, Amy, one day, where we interviewed 24 speakers in 24 hours, which we raised funds for COVID in 2020. And John Amici was on that. And it was all on sport, International Sports Day and sport development and peace. That's what we did the event on. And it was phenomenal. And I was grateful. Again, it was through those relationships I built on the podcast. They came back on. One, we were all in our homebound, but talk about, I said to a point, looking at the positive, it was sad that sport was cancelled in regards to venues in 2020 with COVID. But what it did do, it gave other aspects of the sports industry limelight. And sport development was an area where we could collaborate to be a lot louder noise than, competitive sport. Mm-hmm. So my point I'm saying is, going to your question, how many I've done, I would say easily over 450 interviews.
Amazing.
Yeah, in total. Yeah, so.
Bravissimo. um, Listen, you spoke about also inclusion and development and peace, and somehow fairness is there too. So if fairness were a sport, what position would you play and why, Ed?
I like to be positioned as a educator with execution of change. And let me explain. I like to go with stories, and it links
Please
that
do.
it relates to that fourth point of using a podcast as a tool for execution towards change. And in 2019, so the story of the Athens Women's Football Summit, I have to give real credit to Agis and Maris Christophantos, the two founders, because they've shaped me of looking at sport in a different limelight of a bigger global society. So 2018, I had Maris on the podcast, but then I he rang me about November time, and he goes, it was really random because it was about 4 months after the pod, and I picked up. He goes, Ed, I've got a crazy idea. I said, well, you're speaking to the right guy, because nobody knew what a podcast was in 2014 of an idea of a sports career podcast. And he said, Ed, I'd like to do a women's football event in Athens. I go, what, women's football? I was like, and, I'm from the United Kingdom. They say football is the national game. But if you decode the national game in 2018, it wasn't. You cannot say football is a national game for all back then. And if you go right to the past with the Dicker ladies, when it got banned for 50 years, how can you call it a national sport for all? So, and the FA have done amazing work now. Like we've discussed off air with Rachel Pavlou, who's a dear friend and doing great work. But to have that label, I sort of went, women's football? And I have no idea. So again, I'm all about bringing, adding value to the table with an idea. So instead of me saying yes, I went, yes. Do you know what? I've got a really cool idea. Came across a thing called webinars. This is before Zoom, 2018, remember? Zoom wasn't around. I said, I've got a tool that could bring people together. We educate them. And then in an authentic way, we can upsell them to join us in Athens, because you need a business mindset. So we partnered with a good friend called Dr. Donna Dahan, who was at Hague University. And we talked about equality, equity in women's football, and the importance of language of the women's game, and also important topics like misogyny and addressing it. And we had about 180 people, and then about 10% came to Athens. I'm like, oh, that worked. I was like, that ain't bad percentage for, but what I loved about it is we did an educational product for all. So I had no idea of women's football, and all these layers, or I call them battles, and it is women's football. There are battles in regards to society. It's not physical, but it's a battle that there's a challenge ahead to address for good. And I'll get to the point of my podcast being a different tool. When I went to the summit, this is the thing: if you add value, things happen good afterwards. So I did this webinar. Then they said, Ed, would love your podcast logo on the backboard. So I had free sponsorship. I was like, wow. Then I was a moderator for 2 sessions. I went, wow, like it's first time the transferable skills from being on the mic to now being on the stage. Like I was a bit out of my comfort zone. My first one, I had 8 people, Daniela, and a translator. And it was the hardest moderating session I've ever done, because I had like hurling sheep. I was like this with my 8 people. And so I was 9 on the stage, including me, all about player representation in the women's game. So I had lawyers, agents, understanding, talk about listening with the language. So, and it was an interesting experience, but these are those transferable skills only happen, Danny, I'm trying to give tips while I give my answer, when you put yourself in that experience. And for me, it sort of grew, but this is the point, and I'll get to it. The second day, it wasn't recorded the second day, which I'm sort of glad, because I share this story, it has more impact. But Ebru Coxall, who's a top leader in football, was one of the first woman to be on the board of Galatasaray. So she was on the stage there for 6 years there, and a male journalist asked this question: how can women add value to a boardroom? Well, Danielle, the room erupted.
Yeah.
Like the passion, the frustration, and I had my legs crossed. I always remember it. And next to me was Jim Gooley. It's a dear friend of mine and been in the women's game for 53 years.
Mm-hmm.
I said, and I only just met him that week. I said, Jim, you do realise that Elon Musk has just launched a rocket to Mars and we haven't solved this problem? And I am a podcaster, everybody. I'm not in working environments. Daniela, you've got better experience than me of being in working environments with different cultures, with the UN and how things are done culturally, and maybe some sayings with the importance of our language may come across differently, or
even mimics.
Mimics, exactly. Which this is where education is important. So Jim's smart because he's seen it from another lens of women's football in the United States. So everything's calmed down. Ebru didn't flinch. She just upright, always remember it, and just waited for the room to settle. During that moment, I sat there to myself, like looking up, going, I did a secret mission to myself. I'll explain what this is, a secret mission. I said, Ed, your podcast is more than a sports career show.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a little secret mission, which I called it, that I will interview more people who are women, but they're coming on their show due to their experience, expertise, and most importantly, their passion. And it was Ebru who sparked it. And that was the moment where I knew, bearing in mind this was 2019, every podcast I put on LinkedIn, how I promote it consistently is every special guest I promote is equal.
Mm-hmm.
I've had the privileges of millionaires, I've had athletes, and you've experienced it, Daniela, everybody experiences the same promotion.
Mm-hmm.
I know every post I put, to my best ability of control, I can change the narrative, even if it's at 1%. And it's probably what my most proudest moment of the podcast, where last year it felt a bit right. So this is my secret mission. It was International Women's Day. I went, right, because there was a lot of conversation that women weren't going on podcast shows because of lack of confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think 75%, there was a survey on it. And I'll happily send you the information afterwards so people can see. But it saddened me. And I'm like, wow, I've had these amazing women. So I did a collage, and I think you're on it. All the speakers I've had, now I've done nearly 400.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm correct, I'm 210 that are women out near enough to 400. And this collage, I will blow it up and have it because it's probably what I'm most proud of, because Ebru inspired me. She taught me a lesson with her response. She actually knew that journalist, showed empathy to him, and then found a way to go. It wasn't articulated right, but without that moment, Daniela, I probably wouldn't be speaking to you in regards to how the podcast can be a better educational tool than just interviewing people about, getting a job or getting a career, because it's a lot bigger than that. Behind the scenes of society change within, like you say, football is for all, but also working in the sports industry is for all. So honestly, that's the proud moment. I always bring up Ebru and thanking her. I actually thanked her the year I did that collage, because she didn't realize how impactful her response was into my behavior change. And I think that's how I like people to work in the sports industry, is it all comes down to our actions and our behaviors over a period of time of define what we do in the people we want to support within sport.
So, in your journey in women's football, imagine it as if it were a movie, okay?
Mm-hmm.
What would it be called, and what's the most jaw-dropping scene in this journey in football, in women's football? Imagine it's a movie.
Yeah, imagine it. Like, for me, calling it a movie, I think the one word that comes to me is resilience with a ball. And it's really, football should be about the ball. And it should be about enjoying the sport, what the ball creates on the pitch, and the people who, meaning the players, who create those moments of magic. I think I was just to put it in perspective, I was at the semi-final where it was France versus Germany at the 2022 Women's Euros, and it was a fantastic game of football. And then, of course, the next game was the final, England-Germany. Like, the narrative couldn't be better in England history in the men's game of that sort of rivalry in regards to the game. So to have it as a final, but for me, England winning that 2022 Euros was a game changer in society. And as I said to you before the show, the legacy program, let's start with the players, and it starts with resilience. They celebrated for like 12 hours, but then the next day they were on the bus and sent a policy to the government about more football in schools. Mm-hmm. And as Serena Verman said in her book, is that's using sport as a tool to create change. But also at the same time, you want the emotion of the fans enjoying a sporting moment. But I go with the word resilience because for me, learning for so long from 2019 to the current day, I've been on a very big listening tour, Daniela, of women's football, meaning I've learned by listening from a player standpoint, people who've been in a leadership standpoint, like Kelly Simmons. Like, Kelly Simmons got her first job for the FA, where she built the first ever women's program back in 1996, then brought up Rachel Pavley from 1998 because she was doing community sport, and from then build the program for 2024. That's nearly 2 decades of resilience, which I always remind people that a lot of success isn't reflection of the hard work beforehand. I'll give you a meaningful moment that I never thought I'd imagined, and it just shows that if you put this as teaching people, because sports about experiences, and the podcast is a joy. I think you know that with when I have this mic, I feel so passionate in if I'm interviewing or answering a question. But when I did all this work and I worked with Rachel Pavlou on the Legacy program, it was such a privilege to moderate a session with her. But the key thing is we got on a call, Daniela, and I said, look, can we find a way where we can, with your approval, that we can educate other nations of how to implement a legacy program? It could be a local school event. Small part of the budget can influence the, radius, 10-mile radius of legacy. And she did that. And that's why we work so well, because instead of it just being a session about why is a legacy program important, it's actually how can other nations adopt a blueprint. And there's resources out there where you can model the 2022. Put aside the money, put aside these amazing resources. There's ways, but it goes back to the mindset of approach. A lot of time when you think about an event, unfortunately, straight away, and I've been an event organizer, you're thinking, how do I cover the costs? How do I deliver a great show? We forget about what's the post impact. And going back to finishing the story, I was such a privilege last year to be in the Royal Box. The Royal Box, everybody, in Wembley, this is the iconic moment when they get the FA Cup. They walk up the steps and they give the FA Cup trophy. I was in this box where it was England versus USA for a friendly match, 78,000. And we're in this. It was a buzz. I actually had goosebumps every time a player was announced. The energy was electric, and I'm going. And I thought to myself, Ed, this is a little pat on the back of the hard work. I wasn't expecting it. This was from Rachel Pavlou. I'll be transparent. This is show the importance of relationship building, and I'm grateful to this day, Rachel, we listened to this. But it taught me if you put in the work with the right reason and purpose, it can lead to amazing things. And just to follow up, because you've got to capitalize on these opportunities, I met Hope Powell, who's an amazing leader, an amazing coach, an amazing manager for English football. I actually went to her, and there's a fun story where Rachel Pavlou, one of her jobs was to have a mascot for the World Cups. So they had one called Hair the Share. So with Rachel, she had all the other mascots for the Olympics. The funny thing is the players thought that was her only job on the camp, was to bring the mascot and then the team would name it. But Hope Powell had Hair the Share. And that was my opening line, going, how's Hair the Share? And she looked at me going, oh yeah, Hair the Share's doing all right. And it built such a wonderful rapport. But then I asked one important question. I said, look, I really need some guidance. I've been in the women's football industry for 5 years, really listening, but I've got an important question. She goes, go ahead. I said, how could I be a better male ally?
Wow.
And she said, Ed, just do what you're doing, but do things the right way and do things for the right reason to grow the game. And I just went, thank you very much. And I said, that's what it was, almost like the wisdom you need, where you've got a coach where, you know, I'll speak openly, probably didn't have the same resources as the men's national team, and things have evolved. But I'm just trying to share that you've got to look at working women's football or any women's sport. You can't just jump on the bandwagon because there's large statistics of games. It's important to bring in sponsors because there's validation, but also you need to understand how things have grown to keep growing things the right way for sustainability. I know that's one of your main topics, is sustainability only works when all the pieces work in the system effectively. And that is why I'm in women's football. It's like that component, I think, still on a journey. And to prove my point on this, because I learned this last year, I had Elizabeth Spinal, who's head of the women's football program of AC Milan.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, Ed, it's a hard job what I do. You've got to realize last year, AC Milan's football history is 125 years old.
Yes.
The women's team got founded in 2018, 2019. So come on, how can you compare 6+ years to 125 years, which is the men's team? So the comparison's massive of growth in regards to the men's team, of how they operate, the loyalty of fans. It's almost like a tribal sport, football, of the loyalty. Same with, I'd say, England football, but you know, with Italian football, it's so passionate. But from an operation standpoint, the women's team, it's at that startup phase, but it needs the standards of equality and policy. So AC Milan introduced their menstrual policy for players and staff with maternity. And these are things that should be, if they're in the corporate world, they should be integrated in the women's game. I see you nodding, but these are the aspects of women's football. Gives me my buy-in. Am I happy that Man United beat Man City 4-2 last week? Absolutely. But to work in women's football, you need to have a different mindset from an industry perspective. And I'm just grateful with the summit that by operating 3 of the last summits, of planning the schedule, moderating them, and supporting the vision of growing the game, it gave me a chance to really learn. I will never have all the answers, Daniela, but I'd like to say the people I've interviewed, which are free, by the way, like Tatiana Henine, you should listen to that because, sorry, I'm going a bit deep, but it gives a point. Tatiana Henine and Rachel Pavlou hosted the 2006 English Euros. I didn't even know there was one in 2006. And they operated it in the north of England with 2 hotels, 4 teams in each hotel. And it was a global competition, but you can't compare that Euros to the 2022 of operations. And there are pioneers. I don't use this word often, but in women's football, you see not just human beings, you see actual pioneers who've changed the landscape of the game. Tatiana, Ebru, Kelly Simmons, Rachel Pavlou, Hope Powell, they have really changed the game, and they need to be credited big style. And I think that's where I get my hunger of how I can get better and hopefully support the growth to my best ability.
You know, Ed, I can feel your passion. I can feel that you are knowledgeable about what you are talking about. You have gained quite a few years of experience. And indeed, you are recognized as a male ally in women's football. What does the industry need, in your view, to turn allyship from an exception into the standard? You already said something about AC Milan, but I would like you to expand it in a bit more, this topic, if you have
sure, no,
other things you
100%.
can share.
100%. I think with the word ally, I said I'm going to show a bit of my vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
It was only last year where I felt really accepted. And it's not because people said things bad or even saying good. It was just more individually. It was only last year I felt comfortable in this industry because it's been men who've made certain decisions over a period of time that have brought the women's game to a lesser place of how things were operated. And building trust is important in line of business or any line of work. But when you've got trust, where I go back to Rachel, because she said, Ed, I couldn't play football. And that means there's always that burning desire to make sure there is football for all. But from a male ally standpoint, going about Hope Powell, I'm always reminding myself, like, to do the right thing. And that's my answer to your question. To change the way things operate, it's about doing the right thing. And a lot of it isn't always about the financial aspect, it's about an operation. And I think if we treat good friend of mine, Jeff Mostyn, who was the former chairman of Bournemouth, he took the men's team from League Two to the Premiership with the same male manager of Eddie Howe together. When they took the club, the club was in administration, and the league they got minus 17 points that season, and they, the team's doing very well this season from a men's football standpoint. But I think what I'm trying to share is when I speak to him, he teaches me that we sometimes forget in sport business acumen and doing things, running it as like a business. But the difference is what he taught me. The reason why he saved the club was when you shut down a football club, you're shutting down a community.
Yeah.
And that's where sports business is fascinating, because a bank can close in a community. Nobody will notice. They can go on their phone on their online bank. But when it's a football club, you're losing an identity within that town, the identity within those people. And really, football clubs are a hub for experiences. And so that's why with the women's game, it's about doing the right thing. And it's about putting the foundation in place. And I'll say this sort of, 'cause it's an important point. It's taking good practice acumen from the men's game, if there is any, but good business acumen, but also treating women's football as a separate identity of a business. Just keep it simple. I had Josephine Kwan, where she created these leggings made out of bamboo with regards to the menstrual cycle. So if an athlete had a period, she could still perform. And these sort of conversations are very taboo. I like to say they're a lot more open now, but when I heard this information on my podcast, I'm like, oh my gosh. So right away, you cannot say men's football's the same as women's because of the menstrual cycle. There's one huge factor as just due to our genetics, a biological foundation of as a human being. So, but I think best practice of business can be.
And you touched also a very important topic that is fashion.
Yeah, exactly. And be different.
Yeah.
So I think going back to my original answer is building the game the right way.
So you shared a lot about your past experiences and also the present ones. And here I would like to test you with, again, some creativity and some magic.
Okay.
And I would like you to start the answer with once upon a time. So here I'm going to pop the question and you will answer starting with once upon a time. How did you and your early experiences as an athlete and an intern shape you as the visionary leader you are today, Ed?
So once upon a time, there was a young boy who was that defining moment of lack of resources, and I say resources of education as a tool, who had a spinal operation. And on top of that, parents' divorce. It was all in the same period, going back to my original early conversation. But this young boy learned what resilience was without consciously knowing, but realizing the fact that anything's really possible. And leadership, to be a leader, is something I always aspire to develop myself, but won't call myself it with action. And I like action to speak really louder than words. And that's how I would start that once upon a time story, that it's a process of the journey. You like, God, you get me really creative. But if you really think about it, we are the hero with how we show up online and the work we do. And I'm going to go a bit of depth here because I think this will go full circle. One of my favorite films was with Orlando Bloom, who was a knight who basically, I think it's called Kingdom of Heaven is the film.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about the crusade. But story very short, he's a blacksmith, a baron was his father. He then goes to Jerusalem to be blessed by being in Jerusalem. And it's a story where there's many aspects. I don't want to give away the films, but I love this film because there's many learning lessons with it. But one of them was being a knight. And if you go back to being a knight, you do an oath and you live by that oath. And it's why there's Gareth Southgate. It goes back to being a knight back in the Crusades. That's where being knighted's all about. So one moral of the story I will give away is being the best knight you could be. And there's a bit in the film where he makes a decision against the old king because he felt it was the best way to be the best knight, which it was. But the king, of course, didn't approve, but he respected his decision. That film has given me that approach to be the best sports industry professional I can be. That has been my secret little source of a story. Talk about Once Upon a Time. That film was my inspiration going, I want to be the best sports industry professional I can be. The podcast is a method of educating. Running football, women's football events was a method to educate and understand how events run. But the grounding foundation underneath was to be the best sports industry professional. And don't think I have all the blueprint, but I think I've done all right with some of the behaviors to achieve that. And I'm going to do a personal story with you, Daniela, a part of the story, because we met in Portugal at the SIGA event, but I just turned up to moderate one session and I went, no, while I'm here, I might as well help out. And one of them was one of the best fun jobs was taking you to your taxi and we were having conversations about youth and voice. And I think it's like women's football is the same with any type of person you're serving, is there's an equal voice for all. We may not agree with everybody's opinions, but we respect listening to them and then find a middle ground that there's respect with disagreement, because there could be a cultural reason, there could be how things operate. What I loved with our conversations, I think the last 2-3 nights of doing it, I was like, oh, I'd love learning from Daniela from the importance of a youth voice. That doesn't mean you go on the mic and go, this should happen, and you need to validate your point with reason. But I want people to be listening, if they're starting their career, you've got a valid voice like everybody has in the sports industry. It's just because what they don't realize, I'm giving them a tip, is the fresh ideas and the fresh approach with generations. But without a doubt, you need collaboration to create the global impact. In regards to, when I say global, it doesn't have to be the whole world, but global impact of the people you touch. And for me, my always philosophy is to try and be the best sports industry professional. That, and to break that into a bit of an exercise, I had to write down what my real values are. I've worn this for now 2 years. One of them says equality, which is a dear friend, Pauline, from Athens. That's from Gotham. And I've been living with that for 2 years. And the other one is a good friend of mine, champion-minded. They're just two values that when I'm having a hard moment, I look at that and, why I work in women's football, equality. Why I work in women's football, champion-minded. You need to have a champion, if you look at some of the great, I'm a big Nadal fan, and Federer and Serena Williams, they're all champion-minded in their sport of tennis. But don't tell me they didn't have parts of adversity during their career. They did. We in the public eye may not saw it because we just see the wins, the Grand Slam wins.
Yes.
We see the outcome, but behind closed doors, I didn't know Roger Federer was struggling for, I think, 12 months with his knee. because he got out a bathtub and literally
Ouch.
grabbing anything he could do to come back to play tennis. So I love education on social media, but there's always that behind the scenes of how we operate as a human being. And as long as I get my journal, which I always have in front of me, where I can review my day, review my week, and review my month of my performance, as long as it goes back to being the best sports industry professional, that's what matters.
You gave amazing tips to everyone of those who are listening to this podcast, and youth as well, because you are also, compared to me, very young, and it's extremely important the sharing with your peers what you are doing, so that they can be inspired, or in any case find some interesting ideas that they can apply to their own situation and their life. So presently, what drives your commitment to balancing business strategy with sustainability? And we know it's not only environmental, it's economic, it's social. Sustainability is many things, and inclusion in the sport industry.
What a question. I would say with sports industry, also women's football industry, it's getting the foundation right. And I'll give you a great example. This week we had a real vision, like defining the mission of the organization, the culture of the organization. It was so much fun because at the moment, I'll be transparent, because of the network we've built the trust with these people, but it's like, this is great that work's coming to us. But I said, Michael, Jim, we need to sit down, set the vision, set the culture, because let's be transparent here that we are three men. I want to change that very, very quickly because I want different perspectives. But when you build a foundation, anything, you need to write up the foundation and
have a very strong purpose, very clear
100%.
purpose.
So like the podcast, I've learned had those 4 pillars were the foundation of this show, which is like a lifestyle now, the podcast. Like people struggle, how do you get consistency? I said, treat it like a lifestyle. And I think, and I say think specifically with women's football industry, it's modeling the success of my podcast sort of foundation and implement it in new business. Sustainability comes when it runs efficiently, effectively, and it has like you said, a clear purpose behind it. But I'm going to say this word because it's important. It's like purpose with profit and impact. And my vision of women's football industry is to be a B Corp company. That is like the goal. It's like, for me, being a B Corp company is the way I can visualize the goal. You know, I said about women's football, it hasn't got that global goal yet, where everybody collectively, what we're aiming for, what's the day when we go, we've done that global goal. So my global goal of women's football industry is to be a B Corp that can basically bring in great revenue, but then impact many at the same time. That's what inspires me, which is a bit different mission to the podcast, where it's at the stage now where I'll be honest. I said to myself, Daniela, if I do 10 years, would I put the mic, hook the mic off? Because it is a lot of work. You know it from yourself.
It's a lot of work.
If the things work out, and I think I'm going to go with a tip here. Sustainability starts with the lifestyle you live. It does, because the way our energy, the way we show up, the decisions we make, we have to be sustainable. It is nerve-wracking starting a company. There's that uncontrollables, unfortunately, and there's that you have to have that entrepreneurial mindset. And this is the beautiful thing. It's only now, interviewing entrepreneurs on the podcast, that some of the things I'm saying is normal. But back in when you start something new without any information, it's more daunting. And I think we are now blessed. And I'm going to share another tip, actually, which I'm applying, by the way. But we are so blessed with so much information. I think now there's so much information. The key is applying wisdom. Education versus wisdom. So wisdom is when you see the education, experience it by applying it, and then creating your own wisdom behind it of what you learned or what could have been better. And it's only now I'm developing my wisdom department, then thinking I have to start fresh from an educational standpoint because things have evolved. So I think for me, on that side of sustainability, it's something I'm taking very seriously with women's football industry. because I want it to unite people, and sustainable is the common objective, certainly in today's society as well.
So listen, we move now to the future.
Okay.
You already mentioned something about the purpose and the vision you have for the future. Imagine, though, that you were even younger than you are now. Imagine you were 20 years old in the year 2071.
Mm-hmm.
So, what do you think the sports industry would look like, and how would your envision your role as an athlete, as a manager, as a podcaster, shaping it? What would be the role in shaping it?
I think that period of time, I would say a lot of things are automated. I would say nearly everything is automated. And I have to bring the word AI, but I really think how we operate as human beings will will come down to how things are operated
Mm-hmm.
through artificial intelligence. And I think what I'm trying to share here is what I'd love to see in that period, that you can use AI with inspiring leadership to create a world we believe in collectively of all the aspects of humanity. Like, I know it's a huge statement, but it's true. We're recording this podcast with a lot of there's wars going on. There's people in society who aren't getting their voice heard, and sport. Going back to a podcast I had this year, which was one of my favorite replies, which I had no idea. Something called Liselli, where her dad was the only black family on a white street road in South Africa,
Mm-hmm.
did a rugby party for the World Cup final in 1995 with New Zealand versus South Africa, where Nelson Mandela wore the number 7 shirt of the South African captain, and then gave Pinoir the World Cup. It's probably one of the most iconic moments in sport in regards to how rugby brought two, divisions within its country of people together as one. And I heard a different angle where the dad did a party where it brought people together and there was unity after. I sat there going, this is the power of sport. Yes, the Pinar moment with Nelson Mandela is on the, newspapers at the time and television, but it hit home what I loved about the story. So going back to your question of how I'd like to see sport, in the future, it's remembering moments like that, what sport does. It could be, another good example. I've got many books of his. Michael Parkinson, by the way, is who I modelled as a podcaster, because I think he's a fantastic interviewer or a broadcaster for the BBC. His best interviews were with, in my opinion, with Muhammad Ali or Cassius Clay. If we talk about labels and identity, Muhammad Ali's up there, meaning of how he stood for something bigger than the sport, and how sport brought him together with the, let's call it what it is, the legacy he's left, his imprint of how we can see sport as a tool for all. So that I would always want in the future, where it unites people. And however that is, if it's through artificial intelligence, if it's AI with leadership, if we lose that in sport, I think sport now is one of the only things that's so unpredictable, where it creates human connection and human emotion within a moment that unites people. If you think about it now, because everything's automated, like, my honest answer to your question was, I think sport will be run by robots, but I don't want to say that. But I want humans bring the humidity to a moment that makes it special. If you lose that with sport, I think we'll lose our identity of what we enjoy about human life. And even if you're not into sport, it's same with music. When you listen to a live concert and you feel the passion of that music through that artist, it's emotion that you can't go to a shop and buy off a shelf. And I think in the future, if it loses that, I'll be sad. No, I'm being positive, but I think sport with emotion is keeping that identity to that, because it makes it special.
That's your vision. That's your hope.
Yeah.
Lots
hope
of
indeed.
technology, robotics, artificial intelligence. used with wisdom. You mentioned wisdom earlier on. So in conclusion, what is the one piece of advice or wisdom you would like to leave with young professionals looking to make an impact in the sports industry today or in the future?
I love this question because I asked this on my show and it's nice to answer it for a change. And it hasn't been on my podcast that often, but I'm going to say it from personal experience. Be a self-starter. Nobody gave me the encouragement to start a podcast show. Believe me, when I explained to veterans who were in the Falklands War, when I was playing golf while I started my podcast, best advice, by the way, I learned from the Falklands War, people who are there, unfortunately, some of them not around, which saddens me, but the wisdom they gave me, a reality of living life to the full. But when I decided that moment with that John Lee Dumas episode with Lewis Howes, I went, I'm going to figure it out. And it came to being a self-starter. And I think if you start on that terms and with the right reason behind, like really the podcast was solving a problem. So I think that's my second tip. It links, it has to link, because you could be a self-starter and go aimlessly with no direction. So you need to be a self-starter in a direction you honestly believe in. And you really have to believe in it, build the confidence. I had a very low sense of confidence then, Daniela, because I was like, is this going to work? The podcasts are going to, nobody knows what a podcast is, but it's being a self-starter. You will learn the skills within the journey. And did I know I was going to work in women's football? No. Did I know I was going to be running summits in Greece? No. Did I know I'll be working with teams virtually to create an event? As I said to you off air, 95% of these summits were 95% virtual and 5% was done within the week of like in-person interaction. My answer, no. But it's important, whatever you do, it has to align in the impact in the industry. And I go back to one of your great questions, like how I want to be known in women's football is it's an educator that creates execution, of course, for good. And I think when you have that as your driving force, it will come across in the way you communicate. It comes across in why you show up. It comes across that you may have very limited experience on something, but you can bring a different perspective or something else.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to finish on this last one is like, focus on building experience that excites you. I was nervous with the podcast, but I was excited. And everybody says get experience. Yes, that's important, but I'd rather that person be excited about that type of experience, good or bad, because then you're developing to be the best version of you. In my phrase, be the best sports industry professional. So there are my 3 tips. I'll recap on it is, the first one is be a self-starter. The next one is really believe in your ability on that decision. And the third thing is build experience that excites you.
Well, today we haven't had just an amazing podcaster and a young athlete, because you are an athlete in your heart and you remain as such, and someone who has lots of wisdom for being, how can I say, at the beginning of your life. I mean, you are what, at 30 years old or something?
31.
31, okay. And yet, lots of experience you have already gained in such a short period. And you know what? What I tell myself, Ed, is go as far as you can go, because once there, you will see further. Okay? So with this wisdom shared from different ages. So this is a multi-generational podcast today. I thank you so much, Ed, and let's keep in touch. Okay?
The pleasure's mine, and thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
As I wrap up this episode, my heartfelt gratitude to today's guest and to all of you. Join me for the next episode as we delve deeper with special guests, uncovering thought-provoking insights and actionable steps paving the way for a brighter, inclusive, sustainable tomorrow. Thanks also to Damian Morton, music, and Maria Cortez Gagliano, social media. Don't miss out next episode on shaping the future we aspire to. Ciao, ciao!